Welcome, everyone, to the Robot Thought Leaders podcast. This is Zach Tompkinson and Chris Savoya hosting.
Welcome, everyone.
And we're here with Rob Goldiez from Hirebotics.
How you doing, everyone?
And Hirebotics is one of the companies that I've been working with for a few years, and one of the companies I've been following for even longer. And I've gotten the chance to know Rob here over the past couple of years, and just his story is a pretty fascinating one as it looks at robotics and growth and history of this ramping process that we've seen in the robotics industry, and especially when you look at the amount of investments coming into robotics and the focus of really manufacturing shifting more into automation than ever before. So without further ado, I'd really like to get into asking Rob some questions so we can get the most out of our time with him.
Sounds good.
Cool. So I guess really the first one I've got is what is your background as it pertains to robotics?
So yeah, great question. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and love what you guys are doing here. So my first real exposure was probably in 2014. I was running a business called Scott Fetzer Electrical Group. It's part of Berkshire Hathaway, a small subsidiary in Nashville. And a guy named Matt, who later co-founded Hirebotics with me, I hired him on to help drive automation within our own facility, making our own product. And he ran across this company, this relatively newcomer called Universal Robots. They, back in 2014, were, I don't know what the exact history was, but they were getting their start in the US. And so we bought two 6-axis collaborative robots, sight unseen, no demo or anything like that. We're like, this looks like it's flexible and, maybe a little too much ego. Like we can figure out some way to make this work, right? And I say we, like I did anything with that, but I didn't do anything with the actual making.
Matt was like the guy.
Matt Bush is who you're referring to. Just so for our listeners out there, because Matt has a nice reputation out in the market, and I'm sure there's quite the fanfare around him. So
yeah, and actually before we got the UR, we actually got a loaner Epson, 6-axis Epson, not collaborative. And what really impressed me about Matt was, and I'm not kidding, it came in on a Friday, this 6-axis Epson, and he's sending me videos Saturday morning of it running a machine in the facility.
Wow.
Now
pulling parts off of a machine.
Pulling parts, yeah. It was we made electric motors, so it was loading a lamination stack that this winding machine then wound.
Yep.
And make no mistake, it's not like an easy task to program an Epson, but Matt is the type of guy that's like, I'm going to get this thing going, and I don't need to go home if that's the case. But it was a loaner robot, and we wanted, when he came across Universal Robots, he wanted something that was more flexible, that we weren't bound to one application, that it would be easy to redeploy to other applications.
Yeah.
And didn't require all the safety fences and things like that. And so we bought two sight unseen to find applications for him, and eventually bought, I think, 12 more at Scott Fetzer for a variety of different applications and some prototyping applications. And they there was a great case study put together where they were on mobile pedestals, so we would move them into different areas and kind of lock them in place and run different things on them.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, there was some real business changes that were able to occur with that you were able to regain some business from offshoring or reshoring of your own manufacturing, and you were able to win contracts that you were unable to win before. So there was a real advantage to do this, to drive the cost of your production down to be able to take on those contracts. Is that true? I could be mistaking with another one, but
no, absolutely true, because it's a really competitive market, the electric motor market, and especially these types of motors. And they're literally, suppliers in places like China price them based on the weight of the material. Like if you think about not valuing the cost of the labor input. And so we knew that if we could produce them competitively in the US, right, it could be a differentiator. And we did use that to help pick up business.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a cool topic. I'd love to get back into that after we go through your history a little bit, just talking about the reshoring of manufacturing and some of the thoughts around why it makes sense to automate. But I don't want to hijack that yet. I really want to drill in a little more here on this topic. So what year did you found Hirebotics, or what year did you leave Scott Fetzer and say, I want to do Hirebotics?
Yeah, so the business was started December of 2015. The idea came about the summer of 15.
Okay.
And I don't know if I've ever shared the story with you over a beer or not, but I'll tell it for you and Chris and the audience out there. Literally on a cruise ship with my family somewhere in the Caribbean. It was warm, and it's like I don't read that much as I should, but I was reading Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, great book by Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding. Woke up in the middle of the night on the cruise ship. Kids are sleeping, wife is sleeping, and had the idea of what became Hirebotics, not by name, right? But just
business strategy.
Kind of took my cell phone and went into the bathroom. I could turn the light on and was like typing out notes that I still have. But the idea came about because, I'd worked at run a number of manufacturing companies, and very few of them had 6-axis flexible automation.
Yep.
And it was really just reading this book got me thinking, and I guess taking a vacation got me thinking about, like, why is that the case? Like, why is the struggle? Why are they so scared to adopt this? And at least our premise is that there's some capital involved. There's some know-how involved. And so that was an impediment. And if we could figure out a business model to overcome that, right, it could increase the adoption. And so the idea of what became Hirebotics was that, how do we make it easy and de-risk automation? Everything is getting cloud connected. And this was back in 2015. It's only accelerated since.
Right. Interesting.
And the rental economy is just eating up all sorts of industries, whether you Uber, Airbnb, right? This mentality that I don't necessarily need to own assets to benefit from the utility of them.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about how that's been adopted within manufacturing, but that was sort of the genesis of Hirebotics. It's that automation's hard. How can we reduce barriers? Everything's getting cloud connected. And then this rental, economy where I don't have to be asset heavy. And so
it kind of all happened. It sounds like it started with the business case, really. And in fact, you kind of, from the very beginning, you were thinking of robot as a service. You were thinking of all those kind of business challenges alongside with whatever the technical hurdles were. Or what, is that kind of how it happened, where you were kind of thinking at it from the business point of view before the tech point of view?
For sure. So I'm not, and none of us really are natural salespeople. And so we knew we had to figure out, how do we make that easier?
Yeah.
The how do you make something that sells itself? And that, that's a lot harder than it seems. And I wouldn't say we've accomplished that, but that's sort of the dream, right?
Yeah.
No offense to those out there that are in sales, right?
But no, not at all.
For people with
but this is interesting.
Right?
A lot of our listeners, I think, are interested in learning about how these companies are first formulated, because I think everybody has a great idea at some point or another, right? And then it's really between 0 and 1 and getting it going.
Yeah.
That's where the rubber meets the road. That's really cool.
Yeah. And so between that time period, right, summer, and when we started, when I say started, formed the company in December, it was probably around the September timeframe that I mentally decided I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And for me, at least, and I'm sure Matt's a little bit different, every entrepreneur is a little bit different. For me, it was, my wife had worked, and not to say that it would be easy with her working. I was at the time 39, going to turn 40. And I just felt like if I didn't do something where I thought there was a chance of success, which I thought there was a chance of success, that I might regret it later. Yep. And so between September and sometime in November, when I actually put in my notice that I was leaving, kind of just worked on the model, the business plan a little bit more, and yep. some, talked to folks in the industry a little bit more. But I tell you, there's nothing scarier than starting the first day
on your own.
There are no customers.
Yep.
Nobody trusts what you're doing. Nobody believes what you're doing. Just because you have a little website up there means nothing.
Yeah.
And
so what did that look like? I mean, you didn't take any outside funding. There was no family or friends investing at the time. It was strictly you starting this company, and you were employee number one. And I know Matt was a co-founder. Did you both leave at the same time, both start the company, and have to essentially, I think from in our conversations in the past, you didn't take a salary at the beginning. I'm assuming that you essentially had to, until you had customers, you weren't taking money in. It was all based on, you were funding it from your household expenses and things that you needed to pay for your children and things were being paid from your wife at that point and your savings. So how long of a runway did you really have at that point of a time?
Yeah. So Matt and I started it together at the same time.
Okay.
We left. He had back surgery in that fall, and so he was kind of incapacitated for a while anyway. And so him transitioning out wasn't exactly the same time, but we started the business together. Mm-hmm. And it was self-funded at the beginning, and there was about $250,000 of capital that was sort of set aside for like, this should be plenty to get this business going. And boy, were we wrong. And the thing that, the best laid plans, like as soon as you start working it, right, like just the reality hits of things. And the biggest thing for us was just time, right? Time costs money. And we were paying Matt a salary, and we had our first deal closed in February. So about 6 weeks after starting, we were putting in our first robot. But that one robot is not enough to pay the bills or pay salaries, right? It just slows, elongates the runway.
Yeah.
Right. But time was the hardest part for sure. Figuring out how to take what we thought was a good idea, but a lot of other people probably thought it was a bad idea, and convincing companies that had real businesses to run, right, to take a chance on a startup.
Interesting. So it wasn't necessarily internal processes like things like building your website or those kind of times. It was going out, talking to people, doing the same thing over and over again, showing to them that this technology can work. That was what you mean by time. Yeah.
So we write a lot of software, and even from the very beginning, we've cloud connected the cobots. And so anytime there was like a downtime, which there was a lot in the beginning, right, where you're trying to find customers, it was busy writing software, right, and building out capabilities that we knew we needed. But we were always the first ones to raise our hand when there was an opportunity from any source, even from Universal Robots. It was like, hey, would anybody on this email thread we're like, before the question was even asked, we're like, we'll do it. We'll do it. And that we just wanted to get in front of as many opportunities as possible. But once you get one robot installed, right, you got a little bit of credibility. Once you get 2 installed and 4 installed, right. And so it takes a while, and you got to really have some foolishness or stamina, whatever you want to call it, right, to keep going. Like there's no other option, just keep going.
So you said it was, you put aside about $250,000, and you were probably assuming that would cover you until the customers really, came in and saved you. Was it more than that you ended up needing? You said, boy, were we wrong.
Well, so the thought we had was if $250,000 was put into the business, we could deploy 5 robots that would generate, X revenue. And those 5 robots would minimally like cover, our expenses and salaries. And if we did no more than 5, like we'd have a
You'd be okay.
Not a decent business, but just a little something that could sustain for a little bit longer. And that would have been true if they all came, at the same time, but they didn't, right? It took a year to get those 5 or whatever the number, however long it took. And so during that time, we're spending money on marketing efforts or salaries or things like that. And so time that runway wasn't as short as we thought it was in terms of, how quickly we could take off.
Sure. Yeah.
So how many robots did you do in that first year?
I'm going to guess, I'd have to go back and look at the data.
Yeah, roughly
4 or 5.
And that was 2016 in that full year.
Yep.
Nice. And what by at that point in time, so it was just the 2 of you at that point. When did you hire your first, employees?
So it was 2017, and it's probably worth sharing just kind of the lead up to it. So we, through relationships with Universal Robots, got a story that was kind of put together, not a case study, but a story that landed on the cover of the Fabricator about 2 robots, a little UR3 and a UR5 working together at this anodizing company. And it was a real catchy title called, like, I think Meet the New Hire or something like that, with 2 robots.
I remember that. Yeah.
And that cover story, right? Just dumb luck, not planned marketing, dumb luck on our part. That cover story brought awareness and opportunities and some business. Around the time that that story was published, another opportunity came in through Universal Robots, which was what became the Washington Post story.
Yeah, I remember the Post story. So that was also 2017 then?
It was, but it was back, if you back up, it was around the April timeframe or just after that fabricator that we were put in touch with the writer. And it was literally like an email went out to a number of different integrator partners of Universal Robots and said, hey, is anybody interested in taking a writer on the journey of putting in, some robots or doing some story? And we're immediately, it's like, yep, we'll do it. And I think our ability to say yes immediately, got us that opportunity. And so the writer, Chico Harlan, who writes for the Washington Post, he spent 2 weeks with us on site in Wisconsin, putting in 2 robots and some conveyors and stuff like that. And that's a big time commitment, right? He was going out to bars with the employees at night and stuff like that to kind of capture the human interest story of fear of robotics and just kind of, that human interest story. The reason I mentioned that leading up to the hiring is because we knew before that story was published, but when that story was sort of like in the works, that we could get inundated with opportunity.
Yeah.
Just seeing what the Fabricator one story did, a couple months earlier, that we could really get inundated. And so we started to, I reached out to a close friend of mine who works in finance, not a traditional VC, but works with a lot of high net worth folks, and pulled together some capital from, say, high net worth individuals that either invest on the side or in finance, things like that. Not a traditional venture, capital group.
So more of like a seed round, really, or an angel round, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah. So, and so we had this group of investors, right? We had very founder-friendly terms, right? Because these are people that were putting in some of their, maybe strangely, right? Putting in some of their own money versus like money from a fund that was expecting a return or some time frame or something like that. But pretty founder-friendly terms, and we had sort of that group.
Like a convertible note, or was it equity right off the bat?
It was pure equity, and then there was a line of credit as well.
Yep.
So the way the deal was structured was dollar for dollar. If an investor put in $1 of equity, they were on the hook for $1 of line of credit.
Got it.
And the reason we decided to structure a deal that way is robots cost money, and a young startup like ourselves can't get traditional financing from a bank or something like that. And so we wanted to have not just equity capital to sort of grow the operations of the business, but a line of credit should we need it to go, buy equipment.
Yep.
Smart.
Washington Post story hits, things go berserk. Like that week, it was absolutely bananas. My wife was helping respond to emails. The story was a Sunday front page, 4,000 word, like 5 pictures between the front and subsequent pages. And I'm like having her respond to emails. I'm like, anybody just book 30 minutes on my calendar. And then by like Monday, I'm like, don't book any more meetings on my calendar. Right. That was, that raise of capital is what we used to say, we're going to go hire some people. And so,
how much?
When Zach came in, or was Zach Boyd after that, or was he kind of in the beginning there?
No, Zach Boyd was a little bit later. So we hired 2 guys in the August timeframe of 2017, and at that point we were still doing custom applications, right? Like if we thought the Universal Robot product could do it, even if it was borderline, even if maybe it was not the easiest. We're like, we'll go do it. Sure. What the hell?
Science project. Why not?
Yeah.
So how much capital did you raise? And if you can't share amounts, that's totally understandable. But with that also, what was it to get? Obviously you talked about 2 employees, but was there other things that you needed to have in that time frame as well? Office, robots.
Yeah. So we raised, and this is all public info, right? So we raised in total about $1.2 million of equity, and then $1.2 million available as a line of credit to us.
Yep.
And we had intentions and plans to hire, engineers, and get office space and, do things like that. And so that's really what all the capital was earmarked for.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
So
So
how
it
many
wasn't in
robots
the
were you wanting to
beginning,
take? Oh, sorry, Chris, we keep jumping at the same time. You go.
No, I was just going to say in the beginning, it's so interesting, because I associate Hirebotics very strongly with Botex now and welding and your productization that you've done and how much you've focused on making that product awesome, but in the beginning, it seems like you're really trying to build a business and make it work, make it stable enough to have some room to run. And you were taking anything you could. So that's interesting. It's really cool.
For sure. And, we have a lot of, our business model is, the premise, and I'll say promise, that we tell customers, or at least back then, right? Like it was, if we say we can do it and we're wrong, we're not going to get paid, right? You're going to send the robot back.
Yep.
And that's a pretty damn either foolish on one side or high level of assurance to a customer, right? They're like, well, heck, where's my risk? It's like, you don't have one. It's just, this is like hiring a person, right? You take a risk every day when you hire a person.
I think your business process was always to remove the barriers into automation and into robotics for those manufacturing customers in which you previously had either worked at or had an understanding of that were not buying into this automation for whatever reason. And so that's also, to me, it seems like why you started the company. And so, one of your ways to reduce the barriers into them automating was to create a space where if it didn't work, they weren't going to pay you. And I think that was certainly one of the reasons that you saw successes, especially in the beginning. So I think you did, like you said, you did 5 in 2016. Do you remember how many you approximately did in 2017 in terms of robot installs?
I don't remember. More than that for sure. Right.
Yeah. Double.
It was at least
right?
double from what I remember.
Yeah. And the thing too with our business, right? As a service is, if we put a robot in and we support it well and the application stays in place, we continue to generate a stream of revenue from that robot.
Exactly.
And that's what's very different than traditional automation, right? At least the way it's traditionally sold. We have robots that we put in 2016 that we get paid on today.
Yeah.
Right now, it's up to us, right? If there's a problem with that application, they call us. If a sensor fails, they call us. If something, goes wrong with the equipment, they call us, right? Like we're on the hook to support it. But it can be a very good business.
You still own the project today, whereas in a lot of cases, once it's passed off, that's there might be warranties, or there may be agreement on terms or other aspects to it, but traditionally it's done after it's installed and the money comes through. You're going to support it if it fails, but you're not going to be doing improvements along the way or keeping up. I think you guys are you're sending new software over as well, so there's probably there's a lot of extra benefits that you have as well from your connectivity. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits that a customer may see from your IoT connectivity? Because I know that's a big part of what your strategy is.
Yeah. So it's probably, and I appreciate the question because it's probably not fully appreciated in the market in terms of people just see Hirebotics and they think, okay, robots as a service or rental robots.
Right.
But we spend a tremendous amount of effort. I can't stress that enough, right? Building software, and we always have connected the robots. And so we have, it's been core. If without cloud connected robots, we would not be in business today, period. There's no question about it, because our business model hinges upon our ability, and we like to run with a very small and tight team of highly capable and talented folks to support robots around the country. And when I say around the country, we're based in Nashville, we got robots today in California and Minnesota and Wisconsin and South Dakota and, all over.
Yeah.
And customers depend on a few things. One is they depend on their ability to reach out for support, and they do that in app. And so when they reach out, we're responding, we've sort of built this culture. We literally are responding within minutes. We can see the status, what's going on with that robot, or is it having issues doing that specific application? And the vast majority of times it's not an equipment problem, right? Something has changed in the process, but we can help the customer that may not be sophisticated understand what's going on. But it also is a benefit to the customer because they're getting to see real-time production data in app. They can get push notifications when, the conveyors out of parts and things like that. And so we built this tool set that not only lets us understand how the robots are running, but provides value to the end user, to the customer.
So that's one of the areas that you de-risk. People throw around the words barrier to automation all the time, but I mean, there's a lot of salesy and marketing lingo that go along with that. But in reality, when you imagine Hirebotics in 2015, you were thinking rental to be able to de-risk, the project risk or the financial risk on the customer side, and then the installment or integration and maintainability risk. Cloud was right there in the beginning in your brain as like one of the ways to get that done.
It was, and that itself had to evolve, because in those very early days, like the very first project where we put in a robot, it was cloud connected, so we can see production data. But if there was a problem, Matt or myself or both of us, we were driving to Youngstown, Ohio, from Nashville, and was not like, I wouldn't say common, but we had a few occurrences where we drove to Youngstown, where our first robot was. We're driving back, they had another problem. We turn around and go back to Youngstown, like we hadn't even gotten home yet. Yeah. And so, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention, or whatever that phrase goes, right? Like we continued to see from real, scars where we needed to enhance software tooling so that we didn't have to keep driving. Like it was sort of selfish, right? Like we cannot keep driving out to this customer, that customer. We need better visibility of this or that. And, so we just kept building and building and building, right? And we've gotten to a point now where we can do a tremendous amount without getting on site.
That's awesome.
So how do you combat the age-old fear of connectivity, cyber attacks, things being secure? There's a lot out there especially from big manufacturers, where they're very scared to really be fully connected on their floor to the cloud or to outside, web applications. And so how do you combat that? And where do you see that going in the future? Because to me, that is the future. And it's almost this new age versus old age when you look at manufacturing and connectivity. And in my opinion, some are going to maybe die if they don't do it. But there's also this mentality that some are saying that they never will. So what is your opinion of that?
That's the anecdote that Zach and I see a lot, but it'd be interesting to get your feedback on that, Rob.
Sure. So my take, right, and this again is just what we see, right? We don't see those barriers at all. The only time we've ever seen those barriers is with either government entities or people that are directly working projects for the government. Mm-hmm. And that's usually because they're getting told things by the government. Mm-hmm. But we've had robots at extremely large companies that we've all heard of, like Toyota and Stryker Medical and Domino's Pizza, and on and on. Connectivity has never been a problem, ever, right? It is part of the offering, and so it's a requirement of the offering, if that makes sense. Sure. And so when they're sort of self-selecting in to some extent by saying, I want to go this route, and it's like, okay, well, this is what the route takes, right? Like it's like
there's no option.
What's that?
There's no option.
There's no option. And it'd be like, well, what if I want to request an Uber, but I don't have a smartphone?
Yeah.
Like, well, you're probably not requesting an Uber, right?
Yeah.
You're going to stand outside in the cold and wait for the yellow cab to pick you up.
Yeah. So that's all. I mean, that's just an awesome, from our opinion, I think that's the fear, right? Is that there's this, I haven't even heard it that much from customers. I think it's, frankly,
one of those rumors that just swirls and you hear. Yeah.
So, the other piece that I'd say too is like, there's got to be value there, right? So if we just went and said, well, here, hey, you should put this thing online. If it's not clear why you're doing it, like there's probably a barrier to do it. And so in our case, I think the barrier, like they're already over the barrier when they decide they're going to rent by the hour, right? Like it's sort of understood. But, some customers have questions from a IT security standpoint. Happy to get on the phone with any of them and talk through with our team, like what we do, what we need, what we're getting access to. They're not opening up firewalls. Like we've, I think, designed it in a way that is very IT friendly, but still, highly secure and all that kind of stuff. And, I think the fear of cybersecurity is no different than this fear of robots. And it's usually people just don't really understand, right? So I don't, again, not minimizing the concern, right? But the same people that express that concern are on Facebook sharing all of their personal information.
Yeah.
They're banking online, right? They're on and on, right? They're using the internet for all sorts of things in their life, and their businesses are too, right? Using G Suite for email and collaboration, or Office 365, or
Yeah, I find that's true with robotics in general. You tell, your average like aunt or uncle or someone in your family, I work with robots, and their eyes go wide. They have no idea how to conceptualize what that even means. And the same is true for AI, right? People get confused all the time about AI, and they think it's just gonna be the next Terminator. But it's almost like the closer you get to the technologies, the more you see the granularity of them, or how finite they actually are. And it kind of gives you a new perspective. So that's really interesting, that the kind of the same symptom applies here.
Yeah.
So the next bit I want to sort of get into is the transition of where you are today, and the pivot that I saw in the past few years. And granted, you may say it's something different, but it seems like you've gone away from custom integration. Not to say that you won't do it in the right application, but as somebody that we share a relatively close interactions, you're passing me things often that are outside of what your scope is. So I do see that. And where did you make the decision to go into a more productized approach? Where do you draw the line?
Yeah. So, I guess I would kind of describe our evolution as those early days, first couple of years, we'll do anything. And we did a lot of stupid things. But if we thought we had a chance of doing it and the customer was willing to pay us if we could, we're like, let's go give it a good college try. And we tried. But we got a lot of traction, success, and learned, right? And built a bit of a name, became notorious maybe for that too. As we hired a team back in the 2017 timeframe, what we quickly realized is if every application required a high level of expertise, both in terms of robot programming, end of arm tooling design, integration, it is really hard to staff up a team.
Yeah.
Right. And so we learned that, right, just through trials and tribulations. And so what we decided to do is let's dial it back and focus on machine tending applications, right? We had done a number of machine tending things, whether it's CNC or presses or things like that, taking a part to a known location and processing it and then putting it somewhere else. We thought, all right, that's enough of a scope down from we'll do anything, right? That it would be easier to develop some process around and get a team up to speed. That helped tremendously, right? In terms of getting the team comfortable with different applications, to getting in and out of customers faster. Mm-hmm. In the 2017-18 timeframe, we also got contacted by ReadyArc and Airgas about developing a welding product. Mm-hmm. And that was very attractive to us because it was that key word, right? It was a product. And we felt like we had all the software infrastructure in place to empower someone that knew how to weld, to be able to run a robot without having to learn how to program it. Mm-hmm. And that, so that was sort of the transition, the start of the transition point to we can have even far greater success in terms of robots deployed to team size, right? Which we like to look at how much leverage we can have with a product-based solution that could still address people's needs, right? And we kind of define the product as they can get it in there, get it on their floor, and do the task, right? Not some people you can always define the product down if you scope it down, hey, I've got a gripper, that's a product. Okay, yeah, that's great, right? We need grippers, but a gripper then has to be integrated or put onto a robot, and it's got to be programmed to do some task. And so we really looked at it as how do we design an application experience that doesn't require, we're just abstracting away all the complexities that go with an automation project. And that's really—
Well, you made a robotic solution as productized as possible, so that there's least amount of customization needed from the end user, which is going to be somebody that knows welding, and that they may know robotic welding, but in a lot of cases they probably don't. The goal is that anybody can do robotic welding at that point. And the interesting thing, if you haven't seen the Botics, that I find wild is that you really took an ease of use programming platform, of the UR Polyscope, and you made it even easier for somebody that doesn't even have to, they might never have touched a robot before, and they can pick it up, and within a few minutes they can be welding with it. So I think that you need to know more about welding than you do about robots to get this thing going, which is wild.
For sure. And, all these terms and concepts that you have to know when you deal with robotics, we just abstract them away. Like, we don't talk to customers about setting a TCP or payload or any of those things. We just do all that behind the scenes. Like, we know what's been offered, right? And we know we have ways that we just abstract that away. They don't worry about that.
Yep.
Right. They just go start teaching what they want.
And it was internally first. It sounds like it was a do or die internal. Your software was built for yourself and your own team, and you built it as lean as possible for your own use. And then you realize that there's a lot of opportunity for us to offer this to customers and let them build it. Platform, right? It's like getting right back to the same platform argument that everyone talks about. Build the hooks and then let other people build their own value.
Yeah. So to your point, like when we were doing custom applications or even machine tending, we were writing the program. We've got a team of folks that are very well versed in how to do that on the Universal Robots platform, but not everybody knows how to do that in the world or in manufacturing. And we found ways to abstract that away, right? So they're just using a mobile app, effectively building, their software application that drives the UR, but not knowing it, nor do they care to know how to do that. They just want to weld.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So, Zach, do you have any more questions for Rob, like in the build up there and those build up years? Because there's a ton of other questions we want to get to.
Yeah. The last question, it's an interesting concept, but did you know you wanted to get into building products when Airgas or Ready Arc had come to you and wanted to build the Bot X? Or was it just more happenstance that it all happened at the same time? Did you want to make that kind of a pivot to building a product, I guess, ahead of time? Or did it just, they brought the opportunity to you and you took advantage of it?
So I wish I could say we were that smart and strategic, but once again, no, we weren't.
But it doesn't have to be around welding. I mean, was the mindset there to start to make products into the future?
Yes, for sure.
And then what, I guess, is that your mindset moving forward, or is this just a one-off happenstance? Bot X is going to stay as your one product and you're going to go back to doing more custom?
No. So there'll be more products. And what has been, like, again, fortunate thing with building Bot X is other people got a chance to see it too, whether they're other manufacturers of product or distributors, right, within like the metal fabrication space, just because those people deal in welding, and they see this product that is easy to use, easy for an end customer to use, and it's connected. And connected means tracking consumables,
sure,
pushing out feature updates, things like that, and providing this high level of support that just doesn't require phone calls and emails.
Yep.
And so we've gotten contacted by a number of different OEMs and distributors about other products, I'll say tool in hand products that could benefit from the same approach, but to solve different problems in the industry. And so those are kind of being planned out now. We're trying to be a little bit more methodical yet.
I think that's an interesting thing. When you have the tool in hand, it's typically, if you're looking at like lean manufacturing ideology, it's like the real value added tasks, right? It's the process based stuff. Whereas if you're looking at machine tending, those kind of things, you're moving parts around, and in lean, that's considered waste, right? Whenever you move a part around. But when you're adding value to a part, removing material or adding material to it, that's considered value added.
Yeah. And there's, so that's a good way to say it. The other piece too, right, from our software standpoint, is it's a much more predictable problem to solve, right? It's much more bounded, right? In terms of, I know I'm holding this tool and I'm taking it to in motion to different places to do work. And that can be easily taught through, the software abstraction that we've built.
Yep.
So that leads, I think a little bit of a change in pace, but it's a great segue because, if you're going to put on, your glasses and see 5, maybe 7 years in the future, and you want to try and solve with the same kind of productization challenges, like for example, in machine tending or something like that, and have it work kind of with similar mentality that you were just talking about, what kind of technology do you think we would need? Is it grasping, manipulation, path planning? Not to seed you with any answers, but like, how do you think we're going to get from here to there in order to solve those kind of problems when the technology finally matures enough?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I have good answers to them, but I'll say where we feel strongly is that cobots should be cloud connected, like period, full stop. And I say cobots not because I'm excluding other types of automation, just because that's what we work with all the time. And, you have a computer with driving this manipulator. And the fact that people are questioning whether this computer should be connected to the internet to get software updates, to monitor and all this stuff, to some extent is somewhat mind-blowing now that we're in 2021 and, Tesla's getting software updates through the cloud and toothbrushes are connected and everyone's walking around with their iPads and stuff like that. There is a better experience, even if we're not talking about full-blown applications, because you've taken the step to connect your cobot to the cloud with the right software.
It's a really interesting topic. I think Esben always has this story when he talks about collaborative robots and the safety that's involved with collaborative robots and how, the safety or really the standards in general are a little bit behind the times. And how obviously you want to be overprotective of the human interaction with it, but that some of it is ultimately limiting. And he makes the comparison to when cars or automobiles first came out. When you came into a city, you actually had to have a horse flag you in front of the car and walk, in front of the car to bring you through the city so that no one would get hurt. Obviously, that went away pretty quickly, but that was one of the safety limitations, when they first had come out with automobiles. And I think that there's a lot of examples of that in today's market. And I think one of them is definitely when it comes to connectivity. So.
Yeah, for sure. And there's that unknown factor drives people to make what we think at least is sort of irrational solutions to the problem. They in terms of the analogy you have with the horse and the car. But the industry will get there, and we are going to do our part to help push it there.
Yeah, pull it, dragging
it
by its feet. Yeah, with something. Yeah.
Matt's a big guy, right? So
just put
the industry on his back, and he'll pull it forward.
Maybe we'll have to have you and Matt back on Robot.Leaders in a few months or after we get some more episodes under our belt. I think the two of you would be real fun to have on this together.
We'll have to have Matt give us his hottest takes and see what we can get for the most opinionated opinions possible. And I bet he's got some really cool things that he thinks are going to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I have a couple more questions that I just wanted to ask you, and one of them comes back to like metrics and how you're being successful. I think a common question in looking at any business is, what are you doing that's making yourself successful? And I'm looking at that from a metric standpoint. So when you go in and you look, it might not be daily, but it's at least monthly that you're looking at a specific metric that tells you that you're being successful. And I don't want to hear, like cashing POs or anything like that, because that's, obviously I'm saying, something that would be maybe a little bit out of the ordinary when you're grading and looking at yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that we look at on a regular basis is hours run on robots.
Yep.
Right. We have a cloud connected system, right? Whether customers so one of the things that's relatively new is with welding is we allow customers to purchase if they want. So the customer can rent it, and then if they like it and they decide they want to buy it, we'll let them buy it. So even when they buy it, right, or rent it, or however they've decided to do business with us, right, we look at how much they're running the system. Mm-hmm. And that's the best. There's nothing better than there's a direct correlation between the more they run it, the happier they are. Period, full stop.
So robot uptime, would you say?
It's utilization rate, I think, is really what that is, right?
Yeah. So we're tracking, we can see as well as the customer, right? It's full transparency, right? Hours run by day and not just 4 hours. No, 4.36 hours were run and they made, 87 parts or 750 parts, whatever. And so every customer is different depending on what they're doing, but there is a direct correlation between satisfaction from a customer and how much they run that robot.
So what if they
Sounds
don't
just
have
like
enough
the
parts?
machine tool market. The machine
Yeah.
tool market, you look at utilization, spindle utilization rate, it's interesting.
When you don't have enough, like what if a customer doesn't have enough parts in that application to justify using it anymore? It has, a limited number of hours that the operation is occurring for. Do you recommend, pursuing like a second application to increase that utilization rate?
It depends on the customer for sure. So some of them, I'm probably picking bad examples. Some may be happy if they get 8 hours of welding on that robot a week. Like that's good. That may be good depending on what it's doing and what their need is at the time. Other customers would be, mortified if they were only running it 8 hours a week. So it's very customer specific in terms of what value they're deriving from it.
Sure.
But I'll say what unequivocal, like you start to learn patterns with customers, right? And so we have some robots that non-welding that they run 100 to 120 hours a week. That's 100 to 120 productive hours a week, making thousands of parts, multiple shifts.
Yep.
If that suddenly falls to 20, we reach out proactively. Hey, everything all right? What's going on? You need help? Is something not working right? And we'll get an answer from the customer. Oh, we're waiting on packaging from our customer, right? So we had to shut the line down or something like that. But you see, we've seen a direct correlation between happy customers and business growth. The best way to know that is to see how they're running.
Sure.
And because they're paying by the hour, they don't need to necessarily run it 120 hours to find value in it. They need to run it some amount of hours to find value in it.
It's probably worth exploring that a little bit. So in the early days, like before we even had our first customer, we charged by the hour and we didn't even have a minimum. We just didn't think about it, right? So we foolishly thought, all right, we'll go deploy a robot. And then we thought, well, what if it only runs 5 hours a week? Like we're not going to make any money off this thing. We didn't even think about that. But the first customer, the way our model was set up was that if we're not happy, we could quit just like a person. So you could fire us, or we could quit. And so that was sort of our out, is that if we had a better place to put that robot, just like a person had a better place to go get a job and make more money, we could do that. So anyway, first customer was worried that we were going to pull their robot. So they're like, what if we guarantee to pay you 60 hours a week? You won't pull the robot. We're like, okay. That's stuck ever since. So it was 60 at first, then we went up to 80 hours a week. And so on the custom work, we looked for 2 shift applications where they were going to get billed for 80 hours regardless, but then anything over is, to the second of productive time.
Sure.
With BotX, we started with a by the hour, targeting 40 hours a week. But what we found through partnership is it was too hard for partners to be able to explain how the hourly rate worked with the minimum. And so we said, let's just convert it to a flat rate. So we converted to a flat rate sometime last year and found that it was easier for our partners to communicate to customers.
Flat weekly rate.
Flat weekly rate, yeah.
Interesting. Full circle, all the way back around.
Yeah.
Crazy. And it depends on the market too.
Yep.
Are you a believer that long-term that customers should really look to, I think a lot of customers today struggle with really justifying an ROI or a payback period that will make sense for them. Are you a fan that more customers should be pursuing how to utilize their robots 24/7? I'm not talking about now. I'm saying in 5-10 years from now, is that the pinnacle that robot manufacturers, custom machine builders, productized, solutions, is that the goal in the long run? Obviously, if that's the pinnacle, no customer is probably ever going to fully get to that number, but is that really what we should all be driving for?
So here's sort of my thinking on this. And, but I say it's been formulating over the past several years, and I haven't honed it any more than what I'm about to say. But it all depends on how long it takes to get an application up and running. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is, let's say from buying a robot or renting a robot, whatever, like, let's say it takes 4 weeks to successfully deploy this production application, not just I got it moving around, but like production ready. It takes 4 weeks. Well, now from our standpoint, right, or if you were buying an integrated solution, you better run that thing for a certain amount of time to pay off that investment. Well, what happens if you cut it down to 2 weeks? Well, now suddenly you think about how long that robot needs to be deployed a little bit differently, right? What if you cut it down to 1 week? Now you suddenly think about that differently. And so as you compress that time to get a customer up and running down to effective, let's say you get it all the way down to 0,
Yep.
Now you're just, you start to think about applications differently. So take BotX for an example, right? To answer your question. We are perfectly fine if somebody's like, hey, I need this welding system for 3 months. I got a new order that came in.
Sure.
They may never be able to justify buying a robot, spending the time to go integrate it, to go do that project. It's just too short a period of time. But if the ramp up time to get them productive is very, very short, which it is with BotX, that's an attractive application for us and for the customer. And so as you can do that, you start to approach like ride sharing, right? Where you reduce the friction and the time to get what you need and get the utility that you can move the assets around to where they're needed, whether it's within a company, deploying it to different projects, right? Or cross company.
It's the latency. Yeah. And in fact, that's a huge part of Uber's business model. And you see it like when Lyft was coming to market, they had to seed people with incentives to go out and start to drive, right? So that they could have a minimum threshold on the amount of cars out there so that the service they can provide was good enough for people to want to keep using it, right? So when you have that platform, just as you do with BotX, you have to get it to a certain critical mass of infrastructure or acceptance or utilization, whatever you want to call it, before it'll have enough, critical mass to start to grow on its own.
Yeah. If you go the other way and say, well, there's automation horror stories you hear about where somebody's, they're putting in $1 million line. It's got 3 robots in cages and, it looks awesome, right? Like it's got vision and sensors and, blah, blah, blah. That project takes a lot longer to justify, a lot longer to install, and a lot longer to get a return on. And
that line better be there.
It better be there for years, right? Pumping out that exact same thing.
Yeah.
And those projects it's just hard to make sense of those, right? It's not to say that there aren't those projects out there, but as you start to squash those barriers, which I think cobots have done, and Universal Robots to their credit, and say, hey, you can get up and running quickly. Mm-hmm. Don't try to boil the ocean, right? Like, let's just go add value. It's been a game changer.
Yeah, I think that's a gap that we see in a lot of marketing and sales materials is people consider ROI from really the time that the product goes, that the thing's installed, the robot or the automation's installed, and they consider ROI and appreciate everything from there. But I think it's really way before that. It's when they first need it and they're first compelled to go out and try and seek this solution. That's when it should be considered.
For sure.
So what does that have to say for what the future of like a manufacturing floor will look like? Because you look at it now, I mean, like you said, the most previous example about robots, many robots, vision, the line, very specific to a specific part. As more customization is needed, and really what I see is more changeover coming, what do you think a manufacturing floor will look like as it looks to automate in the future? Do you think how much different will it be then from today in 5 years?
Well, at least when I was like at Scott Fetzer and before, right? We in Espen's famous for saying this too. You sort of realize that you're treating the people like robots, and so you've got these people standing around the lines, right, doing various work and tasks, the same thing all day, every day. And yeah, it is unsustainable, right? Like people expect to get paid a decent living wage, but they're doing work that doesn't add that kind of value, and nobody wants to hear that or talk about that. But I think that what's going to happen is things are going to flip, and you're going to see automation doing those tasks, and those same people, right? Because automation is getting easier and more approachable. Those same people that were doing the work are now in, supervisory roles, sure. Robot supervisory roles. And, we see this to some extent with BotX, right? We're only tackling a very small sliver of the market, but these same operators that would never be involved in changing over their FANUC or ABB weld cell, right, are the ones that are changing over the BotX to do something different.
Yep.
And so now suddenly they're empowered to, get more out of their day.
And I think if the risk is if we don't do those types of automation, ultimately doesn't appear as if manufacturing is going to last within the United States. I think it appears to be more and more reshoring. And I wish I had a statistic with me, but I did read one recently about how much we have been reshoring into the United States since in the last 20 years. But I think ultimately that will go away if the cost of labor is only going to grow, in opposite directions compared to offshore. And I think that if you look at how many robots other countries are putting in, we're kind of behind the 8 ball. And I know Mark Cuban talks about it. I heard him on the Andrew Yang podcast, or I can't remember exactly which one. I think he did it on a few different podcasts talking about if we don't do this, we're really competing against other countries. And it kind of made me think about what you were talking about back when you were able to win other business from Scott Fetzer Group, competing against China and other countries. Do you have any other examples of that, now that you're seeing as you're out in the market?
Well, I mean, the way I would kind of think about what you're saying is, the ideal scenario is components are produced and product is produced as close to consumption as possible, right? Like period, whatever it is, like that's the utopia.
Sure.
And so it's almost like you've got to really get your like your Elon Musk cap on and think about like first principles and say, why can't we do this? Like, why is it cheaper to manipulate metal in China than it is here in the US? It's still just metal.
Yeah.
And once you start to wrap your head around that, you say, all right, well, at the end of the day, it's just metal. The cost is per pound. You start to really open your eyes to like, that's the problem we need to solve, is to say, how can we manipulate this metal in a cost-effective manner? And automation can help do that, especially in places like the US, right? Where the cost of labor is just more expensive than some places in Asia.
Yep.
Very interesting little economics lesson tonight as well.
If you really think about it in some times, like it's like, why is this little plastic widget being produced 7,000 miles away? Like why is plastic cheaper over there than it is here? Right. And it is just, one is because of that labor arbitrage that people are trying, but I think there's a lot of foolishness that people just are transferring their problems around, right? It's like, okay, well, I don't want to pay labor, but I'm willing to deal with this long supply chain. And then they're just not, they're trading problems for sure.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, I mean, since we're on the topic of economics, I figured I was thinking about whether I should ask you this because it could be a bit of a can of worms, but there's been talk about the more that you automate into the future, thinking 50 years out, that there's going to have to be some kind of tax on the value or the work that's being done, maybe for robots, like a robot tax, so to speak, in order to justify the diminished amount of work and revenue that the government would seek from people doing those kind of jobs. Do you see that as like a real potential solution, or it seems like from a first principles approach, you're kind of identifying that there's systemic issues and that's not necessarily the answer, but what do you think of that? I mean, have you ever mulled that over before?
Mark Cuban, one of our investors, he does believe himself that robots should be taxed, right? As they, whether that's, I don't know, that's this year or in the next 10 years, right? But there needs to be a way to, for society, government to derive value from these investments. Personally, I don't know the right way to do it. I will say that our business model, whether it's by the hour or that rental, right, lends itself more to supporting that type of tax because customers are paying based on the value that they get over time, right? Not they're paying for it here and then getting value over time. Yeah. And so we're ready to support it if that's what gets voted in.
That's
right
what
or
I was
wrong.
thinking as well. Because if you just tax the robot, the capital, that's not really adding value. You want to tax the actual value added thing that's happening there. And when you're measuring that by the second, by the hour, that's what you're doing. And then in fact, that's very similar to what you're doing with people too. You're taxing them by the hour, right?
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, with people, you're taxing them by the hours that they work, not necessarily the value that they provide, right?
That's true as well.
People's value kind of varies over the day.
Yeah. IRS has some work to do in the future to figure that out.
Yep.
Cool. Zach, you got any more questions for Rob?
I mean, I could go on for days, but I think we should have him back on here at some point after we see a little bit more of a following, and so we can maybe get other people's questions, and I'm sure we'll get people's feedback on this and see where they want to take a future conversation. So we really appreciate your time. I could honestly, there's some of the questions were probably a little out of the blue. So we appreciate you you taking them in stride without any kind of heads up. And we hope that you'll come back on in the future and answer more questions.
No, it was fun. I appreciate it, Chris and Zach. I appreciate you having me on, and the conversation was fun.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks again, Rob. Yeah, we appreciate you being a first mover on this podcast for us. So, all right, everybody, that's Robot Thought Leaders for this week. Zach and I will be back next week, bringing you a new guest and some new topics. We'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you.